Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to look at something that's come out of the Academy of Motion Pictures, and it's not good. It's kind of a this looks like a knee-jerk reaction to kind of the protests and the rallies that have been going on and the riots around the United States. But basically, they're saying that diversity is now going to be a requirement for all Oscar-eligible films. Now, here's the only question I have with that: is number one, that is an extremely loose definition. But what points of that definition would you enforce involving a film? Now, they've cited that basically England has, or the United Kingdom has done the same thing. They've instituted a similar thing that basically means that they have to have some kind of on-screen representation, narratives and themes, which again, that sounds a bit like something you'd write down on a propaganda sheet, and it basically is. But what's happening here is that we have no definition, and this was I'm sure this was an extremely quick, very streamlined announcement just to capitalize on the riots and to make themselves look good. Because the Academy always likes to say, and I say this with air quotes, current. Now, let's examine what the definitions of that would be. So if you're talking about diversity, does that mean that the entire cast needs to be diverse, so they can't be a homogenous racial cast? Well, obviously you couldn't have a movie, so obviously they're not going to want a movie with all white guys, because that's not going to be conducive to what they want. So let's say this. So let's look at a movie like Parasite, the one that won last year for Best Picture. Every single person in that movie is Korean. Every single member of the crew was Korean. The director was also Korean. It was a Korean film. So the film is entirely homogenous. It has no diversity. It's one race in the entire film, and even in the entire crew, from what I understand. I don't think there was anybody that wasn't Korean that was on that crew. I shouldn't say that. I don't know that for sure, but the vast majority of them, including the entirety of the cast, is Korean. So the on-screen portrayal, given by, if you're going by the rules that that England has posted, the on-screen portrayal and the themes, it's all Korean. So that means you couldn't nominate that film for an Academy Award. Although they would probably get around it by saying it's a foreign film, it doesn't have to follow the same rules, yada yada. They could probably wash that out. Now, the other example that I'm going to bring up is The Irishman. It was done by Martin Scorsese. Now, The Irishman, a lot of people loved it. They said it was a great Scorsese movie. Scorsese always turns out solid movies. They almost always get Oscar nods. They have great acting and great actors in them usually. I think he's taken the true crime trope a little bit. He's driven that into the ground somewhat, but he's still a very capable and very good director, and he knows how to make a great movie. But all of the lead actors in The Irishman are white. They're all homogenous. So that means The Irishman would not be able to be nominated for an Academy Award given the Academy's new rules. And its rules for eligibility. So that, as far as I'm aware, is a hard line. That's not something that's technically supposed to be flexible. But here comes kind of the funnier thing that maybe they do. It's like it would be so corporate and it would be so weird. But the idea, like, okay, you put in a diversity panel. So to get past the fact that you didn't have a diverse film, you splice in a single panel that has in it a white guy, an Asian guy, a black guy, a Latino guy, and whatever other races you want to toss in, or a woman and everything like that, so you can cover all the bases. So you toss all that in on one single panel on a 60 frames per second, camera or an image. So you have that. And that's your diversity, and that's how you meet the quota. And it's one of those things, it's like it happens right before the credits roll or something like that, where it's just one panel that shows that, and it goes by in a split second and nobody notices. It's kind of like when David Lynch would insert Brad Pitt's character into the single frames of Fight Club. think that idea, and maybe that's what they'll wind up doing to like get around the idea, get around the diversity quota if their film isn't diverse enough for the Academy. Although I could see some funny little spoofs being done of the same thing. But the other problem I have with it is more of on a in terms of a freedom of expression level. Because here's the thing: if you want to tell a story, like let's say you want to tell a period piece, you want to tell a period piece that takes place in like the deep jungles of Africa or something. It's about an African tribe, and every single person in the movie is black. Now, somebody comes in and says, "Oh, well, you gotta diversify the cast." Like, how do I diversify the cast? It's in Central Africa, like 300 years ago. So it's one of those things where is that going to be something that studios are going to go down to these directors and start saying to them when they're producing these movies? Because the other thing is we got to define the Oscar movie, because the Oscar movie is in its own little special category for the most part, because the Oscars don't nominate popular films anymore like they did in the late 90s and early 2000s. Instead, they nominate films that basically about 250 people have actually seen and nobody cares about for the majority of it. And it's just these rich Hollywood people that happen to find these films and nominate them. Which, not to say that they're bad films, but it's one of those things like you got to kind of earn your spot there. Again, there are exceptions to that rule, but Hollywood really, for the most part, does not nominate blockbuster films or a lot of films that make a lot of money. Like I said, there have been exceptions. You had Joker from last year, and there was a few other films that were in there that made a decent amount of money. And I'm hoping that's an uptick. I'm hoping that might change. But now that maybe this is going into effect, maybe it won't. But you have what happened there, and now you're putting a hindrance on what Hollywood, on what these directors can do with their movies if they want to get them nominated. And like I said, Hollywood deliberately makes Oscar films. They pick up films that they know are going to win Oscars, and they tout them as Oscar nominees, and they make sure they get nominated. It's a whole almost genre of film that's really just basically the Oscars today are just basically whatever the hot button topic is for the year and just throw it on screen. But it's going to cause problems, because now you're going to have studios leaning on these smaller directors that are making these films. Because a lot of the films that go out for Best Picture are films that are made by lower level kind of indie directors, people that are just breaking in. It's not a lot of it is not the Martin Scorsese's anymore, or very rarely. It's usually Scorsese and Tarantino will throw a film up there every year or two. Or 2 or 3 years or so, or something like that. Tarantino's pretty consistent. Scorsese's got a little bit of gaps in between stuff, but there's usually a veteran director that'll throw something up every year or every year or two. But for the majority of it, it's a lot of it is very young directors that are making very small personal films. So you're going to go down and you're going to tell that kid director, and you're going to say you have to include this, this, and this in your film, otherwise it's not going to get nominated. And that's going to go towards the director having more conflict with his producers and with his studio, which is never a good thing when you're doing a project like that, because again, they're not the cheaps. Most Oscar movies, again, even though I think some of them are they're small and they're kind of out there, a lot of the time they're very personal films to those directors, because that's really how they get the emotion out of the film, and they're able to write it and do it. It's usually stuff that they know a lot of the time. Like I said, with these smaller films, maybe not with the bigger ones, but the thing is, these smaller films, they have more heart put into them by the people that make them, rather than and I don't mean that in the sense that people's hearts aren't in it, but from a creative aspect, or from a personal connection aspect. A lot of Oscar-nominated films I would put higher up probably for the emotional attachment for the director to the film than maybe a blockbuster movie would be. And now you're going to go down and you're going to tell that director that director is not going to react very well to that. He's not going to react very well to that at all. Because again, it's going to feel to him, that's probably going to feel like a personal attack. That's going to feel like something like, we agreed on the movie already. I wanted to tell the story I want to tell. I can't tell it because you're telling me I have to include this, this, and this so that we can get nominated for an Oscar. Um, and the Academy is ultimately just going to alienate good films by doing this. And I feel like anytime you put a regulation or a requirement from a creative standpoint on a film, you are hampering it in some sense. Now, some of the stuff makes sense. Don't have live animals being murdered. You can get around that with special effects. Don't have. Well, these days it doesn't really matter. You can have basically what's pornography, but just not with the artsy porn, I guess, you can have in some films, but you can't just have hardcore pornography. But there are ways around that. But basically, almost anything is allowed in an Oscar film to an extent, as long as certain guidelines have been followed. Just from a rights perspective, and don't break the law and stuff like that. But the stuff that's actually portrayed on screen in terms of the narrative is usually never affected. So now you're throwing something on that in addition to whatever it was trying to say initially. So now let's say for this, because they say narratives and themes as well. And again, this is assuming that Hollywood's going to go after the English version of this thing. So you have a film that has absolutely nothing to do with race or anything like that. Like let's say you have a film that involves let's say it's a war movie, World War II movie, has absolutely nothing to do with race. It's just a bunch of people shooting each other, and for whatever reason, then you have to somehow weave a narrative into that involving a character, so that you have some form of a message in there that fits the narrative that they want to tell. Or the diversity narrative, so it qualifies to be nominated for an Academy Award. So it hurts the film in the end. I think it hurts film. If a film is naturally diverse, then that's fine. Who cares? But it should be an option to filmmakers what they want to do. It shouldn't be hardlined into the guidelines for a film to be nominated. That's insane. But that's kind of my feelings on it. I want to know what your feelings on it. Do you think that this is going to wind up helping film, hurting film? Do you think that the Academy is, basically only doing this as a knee-jerk reaction, and maybe they'll kind of take a step backwards after the riots and stuff kind of die down more? But I want to know what you think. So as usual, put your comments below. I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications. Hit the like button. Subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?